Let's talk about something that confuses so many people when a man suddenly reappears after months of silence. It feels exciting, validating, even hopeful. But before you attach meaning to his return, you need to understand the truth behind it. A man doesn't come back just because he realized your worth overnight. Often, he comes back because something in his life feels uncertain and you represent familiarity. Sometimes it's loneliness, sometimes it's curiosity, and sometimes it's simply convenience. The real question isn't why he came back, it's what has actually changed. Because if nothing has changed in his behavior, his mindset, or his effort, then his return means very little. You must learn to look beyond words and focus on patterns. A meaningful return is consistent, intentional, and clear. Anything less is just a temporary reappearance, not a genuine second chance. Time apart can create the illusion of growth, but distance alone does not guarantee emotional maturity. When a man steps away and later returns, it's easy to assume he has reflected deeply, learned from his mistakes, and come back as a better version of himself. But in reality, what often happens during that time is not transformation, it's emotional relief. When someone leaves a connection that felt intense, complicated, or demanding, the initial distance can feel like freedom. There's no pressure to communicate, no expectations to meet, and no emotional responsibility to carry. That relief can be mistaken for clarity. He may feel lighter, less stressed, and more in control, not because he has grown, but because he has removed himself from what challenged him. Over time, however, that sense of relief can fade. Life stabilizes, distractions lose their novelty, and the emotional noise quiets down. That's when memory starts to play tricks. He begins to remember the good parts, the comfort, the attention, the connection, without fully confronting the reasons things didn't work before. This selective memory can create a pullback toward you, not because he has evolved, but because he misses how he felt in certain moments. It's important to understand that missing someone is not the same as being ready for them. Reflection requires effort, growth requires discomfort, and real change requires a conscious decision to behave differently, not just feel differently. If he hasn't done the inner work, understanding his patterns, taking accountability, and actively choosing better actions, then his return is likely driven by emotion, not transformation. This is where many people get caught. They interpret his return as proof that he has realized their value. And while that can feel validating, it can also be misleading, because someone can recognize your value and still not be capable of meeting it. Awareness does not equal readiness. So instead of focusing on the time that has passed, focus on the evidence in front of you. Has his communication changed? Is he more consistent? Is he showing up with clarity and intention, or just reappearing with vague interest? These are the real indicators of whether anything meaningful has shifted. Time apart only creates the opportunity for growth. It doesn't guarantee it. And if you assume that absence automatically led to improvement, you risk accepting the same version of him who left, just returning with different words. Loneliness is one of the most powerful emotional drivers behind someone's return, and it's often misunderstood as genuine interest. When a man reaches out after a long period of silence, it can feel like a meaningful moment, like he's finally realized what he lost. But sometimes, what he's really responding to is an internal void, not a renewed commitment to you. Human beings naturally seek connection. When life feels empty, uncertain, or disconnected, the mind looks for sources of comfort that are familiar and emotionally safe. You represent a known experience, someone who once gave attention, warmth, and understanding. In moments of loneliness, that memory becomes incredibly attractive. It's not necessarily about who you are in the present, but how you made him feel in the past. The challenge is that loneliness creates urgency, not clarity. It pushes someone to act quickly to relieve discomfort, not to thoughtfully rebuild something meaningful. So he may send a message, start a conversation, or even express interest again. But that action is often about soothing his current emotional state, not making a long-term investment. This is why his energy might feel inconsistent. In the beginning, he may seem engaged, curious, even excited. But once that immediate feeling of loneliness starts to fade, once he feels a bit more connected or distracted again, his effort can drop just as quickly. And that shift can leave you confused, wondering what changed, when in reality, nothing stable was ever established in the first place. It's important to separate intention from emotion. Genuine interest is steady. It shows up with consistency, effort, and a willingness to build something over time. Loneliness, on the other hand, is reactive. It appears strongly in certain moments and disappears when the emotional need is temporarily satisfied. Another key sign is depth. When someone is acting from genuine interest, they seek to understand you in the present, your life now, your needs, your boundaries. But when loneliness is the driver, the focus often stays on light conversation, nostalgia, or surface-level connection. It feels good in the moment, but it lacks direction. You have to be careful not to interpret attention as intention. Just because someone reaches out, engages, or even expresses that they miss you doesn't mean they are ready to show up in a meaningful way. Missing someone is easy. Building something real requires effort, clarity, and consistency. The most grounded approach is to observe patterns over time. Does his effort remain when the initial excitement fades? Does he take initiative to see you, invest in you, and move things forward? Or does he only appear when it suits his emotional needs? Because at the end of the day, someone who truly values you doesn't just come back when they feel lonely. They stay, even when they don't. Familiarity has a powerful pull, especially when life feels uncertain or emotionally unsettled. When someone comes back after a long period of no contact, it's easy to interpret that return as something meaningful or intentional. But often, what's really happening is much simpler. He's gravitating toward what feels known, predictable, and safe. As human beings, we are wired to seek comfort. The unknown requires effort, risk, and vulnerability. Meeting new people, starting fresh conversations, and building new emotional connections all demand energy and uncertainty. In contrast, returning to someone from the past feels easier. There's already a shared history, an understanding of each other's personalities, and a sense of emotional familiarity that doesn't need to be rebuilt from scratch. That sense of ease can be very appealing. He knows how conversations flow with you. He knows what kind of attention you've given before. He knows on some level how you might respond. And that predictability reduces the emotional risk. It allows him to step back into connection without facing the discomfort that comes with something entirely new. But comfort is not the same as compatibility. Just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's healthy, fulfilling, or right for the long term. In fact, many people return to situations that didn't work simply because they recognize them. The brain often prioritizes what is known over what is actually good. This is where emotional memory plays a role. Over time, the intensity of negative experiences can fade, while the positive moments become more prominent. He may remember the laughter, the connection, the way you understood him, but not fully hold on to the reasons things ended or the patterns that created distance in the first place. That selective memory makes returning feel justified, even if nothing has fundamentally changed. For you, this can feel confusing. His return might seem warm, natural, even comforting. It can bring back a sense of closeness quickly, as if no time has passed. But that familiarity can also create a false sense of progress. Just because it feels easy again doesn't mean it's moving in a healthier or more stable direction. What matters is not how quickly the connection resumes, but whether anything within it has evolved. Is he approaching you with more clarity, more consistency, and more intention? Or is he simply slipping back into the same dynamic because it feels comfortable? It's important to stay aware of the difference. Familiarity can create a strong emotional pull, but it doesn't guarantee growth, effort, or commitment. And if you rely on how natural it feels, instead of what is actually happening, you risk repeating the same cycle that led to distance before. A meaningful connection isn't built on comfort alone. It's built on conscious effort, mutual respect, and a willingness to do things differently. Without that, familiarity becomes a loop, not a foundation for something better. Not all returns are driven by a desire to rebuild something meaningful. Sometimes, what brings someone back is a sense that something was left unresolved. Human nature struggles with open emotional loops. When a connection ends without clear closure, without full understanding, accountability, or emotional resolution, it tends to linger in the background of the mind. He may find himself thinking about how things ended, replaying conversations, or wondering what could have been different. This isn't always because he wants to commit or move forward in a serious way, but because uncertainty creates tension. And that tension often leads people to revisit the source, not to rebuild it, but to make sense of it. Curiosity plays a big role here. He may want to know if you've changed, if you still feel the same, or if he still has a place in your life. It's less about creating a future and more about answering questions that were never fully addressed. That curiosity can feel like interest, especially when it shows up as messages, attention, or renewed communication, but it doesn't always carry intention behind it. Another layer of this is emotional validation. If things ended in a way where he felt unsure of how he was perceived, he might come back to subtly check that. He may want to confirm that there are no hard feelings, that you still see him positively, or that he didn't lose all value in your eyes. This isn't necessarily manipulative, it's often unconscious, but it still centers around his need for reassurance, not a mutual desire to build something real. The challenge is that these interactions can feel meaningful in the moment. Conversations might go deeper, old memories might resurface, and there may even be moments of vulnerability. But vulnerability alone is not a sign of commitment. Someone can open up emotionally without having any real plan to move forward. This is where many people get pulled back in. They interpret the depth of conversation as a signal that something important is happening. But depth without direction can be misleading. It can create a sense of closeness without any actual progress. What you want to look for is whether that curiosity and unresolved emotion turns into clear, consistent action. Does he express what he wants now? Does he take steps to create something different from before? Or does the interaction stay in a cycle of talking, reflecting, and revisiting the past without moving forward? Because unresolved feelings can keep a connection alive in someone's mind, but they don't automatically create a foundation for the future. And if his return is driven by a need to close a loop rather than build something new, then once that emotional tension is relieved, his presence may fade again. Understanding this helps you stay grounded. Not every return is an invitation to start over. Sometimes it's just an attempt to make peace with what was left unfinished. One of the most important realities to understand is that not every return is about commitment. Sometimes it's about access. When a man comes back after months of no contact, he may not be thinking about building something meaningful. Instead, he may simply be checking whether the door is still open. Access means emotional availability, attention, and the possibility of connection without responsibility. It's the comfort of knowing that he can step back into your life, receive warmth, conversation, or even affection without having to clearly define his intentions or make a real investment. And this is where things can become confusing because his behavior might still feel engaging, even sincere at times. He may start with a simple message, something casual and non-committal, just to see how you respond. If you reply positively, he gets confirmation that he still has a place in your world. From there, he might increase his efforts slightly. More messages, more attention, but still without direction. It feels like progress, but in reality, he's just testing the level of access he has. The key issue here is that testing access doesn't require him to be clear about what he wants. He doesn't have to define the relationship, make plans for the future, or show consistent effort. He only needs to do enough to keep the connection alive. And if you're not paying attention, it's easy to interpret that as genuine interest, when it's actually minimal investment. This dynamic often leads to inconsistency. He shows up, then pulls back. He engages, then becomes distant again. Not necessarily because he's confused, but because his goal isn't stability. It's availability. As long as he knows he can return and be welcomed, there's no pressure for him to change his behavior. Another important aspect is that access benefits him emotionally. It gives him reassurance, boosts his ego, and provides connection when he wants it. But if that access is not matched with commitment, it leaves you in a position where you're giving without receiving something equally solid in return. That's why boundaries become essential. You have to shift your focus from his words, or even his temporary effort, to what he's consistently offering over time. Is he making clear plans? Is he showing up reliably? Is he aligning his actions with a genuine desire to build something? Or is he staying in a space where things are undefined and easy for him? Because someone who truly wants to be with you doesn't need to test access. They step forward with intention. They make their presence clear, their effort consistent, and their direction known. If you allow someone to come back without requiring clarity or change, you risk becoming a place they visit, not a person they choose. And there is a big difference between being an option that's available and being a priority that's valued. At the end of the day, a man coming back after months of no contact is not the powerful moment people often believe it to be. It's simply a moment that needs to be understood clearly. His return by itself doesn't prove growth, intention, or commitment. It only reveals that, for one reason or another, he felt the pull to reconnect. What truly matters is not his reappearance, but his behavior after he returns. Because real interest is not inconsistent. Real intention is not confusing. And real change is not temporary. If he has genuinely grown, you will see it in his consistency, his clarity, and his willingness to show up differently than before. This is where your awareness becomes your strength. Instead of getting caught up in the excitement of his return, you learn to observe, to question, and to protect your standards. You stop asking, why did he come back? And start asking, what is he actually offering now? Because a meaningful connection is not built on history, emotion, or familiarity alone. It's built on present effort and aligned intention. And if those things are missing, then his return is not a second chance. It's simply a repetition of the past.